All right, welcome everyone to another edition of Garden Hour. My name is Amanda Bachmann. I'm the SDSU Extension Urban Entomology Field Specialist based here in the Pierre Regional Center where it is sunny and hot and we are not getting any of the rain that everyone else is getting. So that's that's my weather update. And I am joined tonight by two additional speakers, which is very exciting. I'm super stoked that we have a full slate of three of us on Garden Hour this evening. So hopefully, we'll have tons of information and also time for questions. So for those of you watching along at home with us, make sure to throw your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. You can keep an eye on the chat. That's where we might drop some links and other resources. And then if you have any technical difficulties, feel free to raise your hand and one of us will shoot you a message. And we'll get questions at the end of every segment, and then hopefully we'll have time for a few at the end. So throw those in there. And just a reminder, this is our third to last garden hour. I had to look at the calendar and do some real quick math, but we will be on next week and the week after. And then you'll have to wait for us in the off season or come see us in person at some of our upcoming events. But tonight I'm joined by Cody Molnar, who is our new SDSU Extension Horticulture Plant Pathology Field Specialist. Glad to welcome another fellow Pennsylvanian to the team. We are slowly taking over South Dakota horticulture. So Cody, thank you for joining us. And what are you going to be talking about tonight?
Thanks. So I'm going to be talking about a topic similar to what I was working with in my past position. I'll be talking about the Aspergillus phytoplasma and its associated diseases.
Awesome, because yeah, people are asking about that last week. So I'm excited that you are here to tell them real facts instead of what things an entomologist made up. And I'm also joined by Robin Buterbaugh, who is our SDSU Extension Horticulture Field Specialist, who is now based out of Brookings, but still doing a lot of work in Sioux Falls. And Robin, what are you going to be covering this evening?
Well, tonight I'm going to be talking about cardboard in the garden, whether it's good or bad, because there's been quite a lot of controversy about that.
Fantastic. I have so many giant IKEA boxes in my house, and I can't decide if I'm putting them in the garden or if I am turning them into cat scratchers. So this might make some decisions for me. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to turn things over to Cody. So Cody, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we'll let you know if everything's looking good, and then you can take it away.
All right. I think we're good. All right.
Good.
All right. I'm going to be talking about the Aspergillus phytoplasma. Some of you may have been around in the winter and heard Maddie talk about the poinsettia phytoplasma. They're an interesting group of diseases that are really weird and really fun to look at, but probably not great if they're happening in your garden. Oh, no. There we go. So, what are phytoplasmas? Phytoplasmas have been around for a long time. We've known about them for decades, in some cases even centuries. But until relatively recently, we didn't really understand what they were, how they actually worked. In a general sense, they're normally not as concerning, especially when you compare them to other fungal and bacterial diseases, but sometimes they can cause outbreaks that are extremely devastating and damaging. For example, in the Pacific Northwest, the X disease phytoplasma is causing a few $1 billion worth of damage to the stone fruit industry. Initially, they were thought to be viruses, even though they are bacteria, because they behave a lot more like a virus than a typical bacteria does. We can't culture them, which kind of led to a lot of the confusion about what they were initially, and really limits our ability to do any sort of research or laboratory work on them. They're transmitted by sap-feeding insects, in particular the leafhoppers, plant hoppers, and psyllids. And to add to that confusion, they also normally don't produce normal bacterial symptoms. They don't produce any lesions or streaking or any sort of necrosis on tissues, but instead they produce growth abnormalities, like some viruses can. But in the 1970s, we got electron microscopy and we were finally able to look deeper. And we found that they're really weird bacteria. This is a poinsettia that you can see the phloem bundles in most of the image are just filled with these little spheres, and that's actually the phytoplasma. That phloem bundle in the lower left is actually clear for some reason. Phytoplasma are weird. And they are very weird. They don't have a cell wall, which kind of results in them kind of having an amorphous appearance whenever they're actually viewed under the microscope. but it also means they don't really have that rigidity and protection that bacteria typically have. As I mentioned, we can't culture or isolate them, which really limits our ability to do any sort of laboratory work. Even for bacteria, they have very small genomes, and they themselves are very physically small, and their genomes are often very repetitive, which is very strange for bacteria. And they lack a lot of essential genes. Most of their metabolic genes are missing, which was really strange. We weren't sure what they actually ate for a long time. And most importantly, they're an obligate parasite. They cannot live outside of a living host. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what their life cycle is, although it's more appropriately termed a disease cycle because no one phytoplasma actually does all of this. In plants, the phytoplasmas live almost exclusively in the phloem, the living vascular bundles that transport sap and other plant products throughout the plant. Leafhoppers and plant hoppers and psyllids feed on the phloem, and when they do, they can sometimes take up some of the phytoplasma into their digestive system. Once they do that, the phytoplasma goes through their intestinal wall, their stomach walls, it's the foregut, and slowly spread through the hemolymph and eventually colonize their salivary glands and their brain. Once they do that, they are able to be transmitted every time that leafhopper feeds on a plant. It'll spit out a little bit through its proboscis. And that's how they spread, and the cycle will continue from that point. Aster yellows is a fairly interesting one of the group. It may be one of the oldest documented phytoplasmas, known even in China in the 1600s, where it would produce green flowers. But more important for our story, it first appears in the eastern US in the 1900s, where it caused its normal weird flower symptoms, but was generally ignored. However, in the 1930s, it started to show up in California in celery, where it completely decimated the production and then kind of disappeared off. And that sort of boom and bust is really typical of phytoplasma outbreaks. So that brings us to the actual name of the organism, which is Candidatus phytoplasma astris, which is a bit of a mouthful, so I'll generally just refer to it as Aster yellows from this point. And it causes a pretty wide range of symptoms. It can be yellowing and decline, which you can see on the image on the side, which is typically seen more of in the barley and the wheat. But it can also cause all sorts of growth abnormalities, phylity, virescence, witch's brooming, which you can see it in the Arabidopsis and the canola. And it can also do stunting, leaf rolling, and curling. And the symptoms can really vary depending on what the host is and the strain of Aster yellows that is present. Some are more lethal and aggressive, whereas some are more funky, for lack of better words, where they produce those growth abnormalities rather than just outright killing the plant. And in many cases, as we're learning recently, hosts can be asymptomatic. Sometimes they can never develop symptoms, but will still be able to transmit the phytoplasma when they're fed on. And sometimes, especially in the case of when they infect woody plants, they can take several weeks to years before they start showing symptoms. The host list of Aster yellows is enormous. It encompasses over 80 families of plants, and I've just listed several of the more concerning or economically important hosts: asters, canola, carrots, celery, chrysanthemum, coneflowers, and corn. I just wanted to do like a little C alliteration. Onions and garlic are other important ones that it does show up in, where it causes a disease known as onion yellows. Since most of these diseases predate us knowing what they were, every time they show up in a new host, we gave them a new name. It results in a lot of confusion now. It can also show up in barley and wheat and sunflower, and I'd be willing to bet that the host list is far larger than what we know, because if something is not symptomatic, we don't check it for phytoplasma. So there's probably a lot of hosts that just fly under the radar because they don't develop any overt symptoms, or they're not economically important, and that kind of drives what research is focused on. So I mentioned they're spread by leafhoppers, and like all phytoplasma, so is Aster yellows. Specifically for it, it is vectored by the Aster leafhopper, Macrosteles quadrilineatus. Each phytoplasma tends to have its own vector or set of vectors that are somewhat unique to it. Aster yellows can also use over 30 other species of leafhoppers that are found on the west coast of the US and in Europe and Asia, but The main one we deal with here is going to be Macrosteles quadrilineatus. Because they can only be transmitted through feeding, this leafhopper obviously feeds on pretty much anything it lands on. And perhaps the worst part for management, they can actually be blown in on wind currents and storms from thousands of miles away. We may be getting infected leafhoppers from California, for example. So if you think you have a plant that might be infected with Aspergillus, but you're not sure, it has to be confirmed via PCR methods because we can't culture it, we can't isolate it. It has to go through these sort of DNA technologies in order to actually know if it's there or not. And so if you're curious, send samples to the clinic. This is my first PowerPoint, so I should have had the address on here, but I'm sure it's going to be shared at some point or in other presentations. So if you know you have it, what do you do? How do you manage it? Unfortunately, our only real remedy is just to kill the infected plants. There's no cures, there's no treatments. Once a plant is infected, it will remain infected until the plant dies. And if it infects a perennial, it will basically be infected indefinitely. The good news is because it is an obligate parasite, once that plant dies, it dies with it. So you can compost infected plants or mulch or any of that. As long as the plant is dead, it really doesn't matter. Potentially, you can try to plant some resistant varieties if they exist, and that is a big if. A lot of your ornamentals don't really have resistant varieties developed or could even be developed realistically. So if you're curious if something does have a resistant variety to it, just email me and ask, and I'll try to I'll find if there is one. And the one last thing I want to add for management, controlling leafhoppers is generally not a viable option. They are very mobile, they reproduce rapidly, they're very hardy, and as I said, they can be blown in from California, so you can be doing a great job and they'll still blow in. Um, it's really only successful in large commercial operations for a homeowner or a gardener. Controlling them really isn't a viable option. So the best thing to do, kill the infected plant, even though some cases they do look really neat. So that's my contact information. I would suggest using email. I'm still kind of figuring out how to get the phone to forward to my phone and get a work phone. So email is the most reliable way to contact me. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Cody. And yeah, that host list, it kind of looks like when we put up the host list for all the things that Japanese beetle eats. I know we've been getting, some questions from folks in like all sorts of different plants. Oh, we have a question in the chat. Can you throw those references up again?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, what are some plants that you have run across? Have you run across any Aster yellows in South Dakota or gotten any questions about it? Like what kind of plants you've seen it in?
So I haven't gotten any for Aster yellows myself, and in Washington, it all right, I'm not sure if I'm getting the references up.
We can just see your desktop.
Okay, well that is not what I wanted.
I was gonna say, and
um,
Michael, who put the question in the chat, if you just want to shoot Cody an email, he can also
yeah,
send you those
that might be
references.
easier.
That might, yeah. But yeah, I know,
But yeah,
I
so I haven't seen Aster yellows here yet. It did show up a little bit, interestingly, in wheat in Washington. I didn't see that, but I heard that from a coworker who, us being one of the main phytoplasma labs, had mentioned that they were detecting phytoplasma in wheat, and we sequenced a few of them, and it matched Asteris, and they were seeing decline. I have heard that it shows up a lot in coneflowers here. That may
Mhm.
be a combination of that's something the leafhopper likes to eat, and coneflowers are very sensitive to infection. Certain plants and definitely varieties within those plants can be more or less responsive to infection.
Yeah, I've noticed just, running across some posts on, some different like South Dakota, gardening pages that coneflower seems to be one of the big sort of hosts or places where it shows up. Which is a super bummer because it's a great plant for pollinators. It's, usually really good in cultivation. Like common in the landscape, so it's always a bummer when a perennial like that can get a disease that there's really not a whole lot you can do.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's kind of a general theme with the phytoplasma outbreaks in general is
mhm.
eliminate the alternate hosts. Well, if your alternate host list is pretty much every other vascular plant, there's not a lot you can do. We see with
Yeah.
X disease, we weren't really able to do that because it likes dandelion, and good luck getting rid of dandelions.
Right, exactly. And so with the aster yellows, like do you guys see it sort of like in cycles in an area? Like I'm noticing, sort of people are really getting the search image for it like this summer, it seems like. And is that because possibly it's increasing in prevalence and it will like eventually crash?
Yeah,
Clearly on the entomology side, we should be paying more attention to the leafhoppers, but not like we can really do a whole lot to them.
yeah, and I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. It happens with X's, it happened with Aster Yellows. I'm trying to think of other ones. Those two are kind of the big concerning ones because they either hit an extremely wide range or very economically important crops. But we
Hmm.
see these kind of boom and bust cycles where they rapidly expand, they infect a wide range of things, and then after about 5 or 10 years, they start to die down, and you don't really see them again for about 30 or 40 years, and then the cycle repeats again.
Right.
So if you're really struggling with them, my advice would just be to uh, remove the infected plants. I'll do a bit of research and see if there are any resistant coneflower varieties, if that's a really popular plant. I'm still new here, so I'm not sure. But I'll see if I can find any for that. And if not, maybe find some other native flowers that are like more resistant to this.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, this is kind of the reality of phytoplasma outbreaks is we just kind of have to wait them out, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So for any grad students out there, now might be the time in South Dakota to start your project on phytoplasma. It might be getting hot. Uh, we are going to switch over to Robin now, but if folks still have questions about the aster yellows or any of the plant disease stuff for Cody, throw those in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. But I will turn things over to Robin.
Thank you, Amanda. And I was just going to add, we had a question just this week about aster yellows in cucumber. And I
Oh,
think we
yeah.
determined that it was aster yellow. And then sadly, I think I just pulled out a coneflower because I suspected that it had aster yellows as well. I had two regular purple coneflowers, the Echinacea purpurea, one right next to each other. One looked gorgeous. The other one never turned purple. It just stayed green. It didn't have any of the weird, funky kind of like shoots out of the center, but it wasn't turning purple. So I was just like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I pulled it out and threw it away. So anyway, that's my sad story. I
We'll all
was kind of
commiserate about our coneflowers.
yeah. Well, I was actually kind of curious, maybe if some of the varieties like the Echinacea angustifolia and the Echinacea pallida might be more resistant. That would be something maybe people could look into. They don't have quite the robust foliage and purple flowers like the purpurea species, but they are, especially the angustifolia is native to South Dakota, whereas purpurea actually isn't native here. So anyway, off topic. But what I'm going to be talking about today is cardboard in the garden, friend or foe. So if you've been on any gardening Facebook pages or forums or such things like that, you may have recently heard a huge kind of debate about whether or not cardboard should be used in the garden, whether it's safe to be used in the garden, and all that. So that's what I'm going to get into today. So what people typically use cardboard for in the garden is the base layer for sheet mulching. It's a kind of a no-till method of preparing the soil, where you lay layers of cardboard down with organic matter. You kind of sometimes do some alternating layers where you're using different materials like compost, yard waste, straw, grass clippings. Occasionally, arborist wood chips will also go on top of cardboard, although you don't necessarily want to use the wood chip so much in a vegetable garden as you would maybe in more of your trees or native plantings. So you can use it really in any type of garden. So for vegetables, if you're trying to layer on top of the soil, you would want deeper mulch layers, those different layers of organic material. But where I've used it for native plants, usually I have a thinner, like just a layer of cardboard and then a thinner layer of wood chips. And this method is actually kind of recommended by Charles Dowding. Ruth Stout, if you've ever heard of Ruth Stout, is one of the original proponents of that. She was kind of the proponent of like the no work gardening, where you just put your potatoes down and throw straw on top and don't even dig them in. So anyway, that's where Ruth Stout is from. So there's a lot of reasons why we can use sheet mulch with cardboard. First off, most people use them for suppressing weeds. They can kind of help build soil. I know that often it's related that when cardboard is laid down, and whether it's just wood chips or other layers are on top of it, if you pull that back, it's just full of earthworms. So that's really a good indication that you're getting good soil texture and aeration. It's also a good method if you have areas of poor, rocky, or compacted soil that you want to eventually build up and create a garden if you are short on space and you don't have a lot of options. So building up your soil is better than necessarily trying to till in a lot of organic amendments. Another good reason why sheet mulching with cardboard is effective is that it helps to retain water. I know in areas where I've used it, not necessarily this summer, but when we've had areas of drought or not having a rain for weeks and weeks, I'll kind of feel underneath that cardboard and wood chip layer, and often it's still moist when the rest of the garden is dry. And then along with that, it also helps to moderate the soil temperature, which really, any type of a mulch should retain water. Sometimes if you're using like plastic mulches, your soil temperature is going to be higher, but more of these organic, cardboard and wood chip or straw mulches are going to help to moderate that soil temperature, keep the soil temperature lower than bare ground, and then also just decrease the variability in the temperature fluctuations. So here are a couple examples of the no-till garden bed prep that you would use primarily for seeds or transplants in a vegetable garden. So this picture on the left is actually one of my older gardens where I have just a layer of cardboard down. You can see the cardboard in the foreground, and then kind of in the background, I've transplanted squash plants into there and then also put down a layer of mostly just straw on top of that. And that works pretty well. And you can plant into that pretty quickly if you're just using a thin layer of cardboard. I use my hori knife. It's kind of a garden trowel knife. And then I just kind of punch right through the cardboard in the areas that I want to plant. You can also let the cardboard sit a little while before planting into it. And then the image on the right is from Toby Hemingway's Gaia's Garden book. And he is advocating for many, many layers of, cardboard, newspaper, compost, other organic matter. And this could make a really great garden bed, but it's also going to be labor and material intensive. So it might not be feasible if you've got a larger space. Here is my no-till raised garden bed that I put in my backyard just last year. And so this is also a way that you can use cardboard to suppress weeds. It's almost a modified horticulture method that I use that has also kind of sticks and potentially logs, but in this case, just sticks. So I laid down a fairly thick layer of cardboard underneath that raised garden bed area. And then I layered it up with different organic material. You can see I do have some sticks there. I have some like brown paper packing material, some grass clippings. And then I actually didn't have soil on it throughout the winter. So then throughout the winter, I dumped my kitchen compost in there. And then I also added spent mushroom media. We have in Brookings a source of mushrooms, and I would get the spent mushroom bags and then kind of break those up and put them in the bottom of my garden bed. Now, the spent mushroom media is made of sawdust. Those are like sawdust blocks. So I did want to be careful to not use too much of that. It does look like I used quite a bit here. But then I also made sure to still layer a lot of nitrogen-rich material like the grass clippings and the compost on top of that. And then after that, I put a layer of like garden soil, potting mix, whatever I had to make sure that it was built up and that I could plant directly into that with either the transplants or the seeds. And then here is this spring and summer. And actually, I just wanted to put this picture in here because the spent mushroom media edition provided an added bonus, and it actually provided me with some oyster mushrooms. I didn't get to these in time. I didn't notice that these were growing out the side of my raised bed, but I did get a second flush of mushrooms later on in the summer that I managed to catch and eat, and they were delicious. And so here on the left, you can see that my transplants were pretty small. I had peppers and marigolds. And on the right, I have what it's looking like actually just tonight. I took the picture right before garden hour. And the plants seem to be doing fine, regardless of the amount of that sawdust mushroom media in there. Some of those pepper plants are like 3-4 feet tall. My carrots are lush. So anecdotally, the mushroom media worked well, and so far the cardboard base layer really kind of helped to prevent a lot of the weeds that were growing in that area. And one of the reasons I did put that raised bed in there is because that whole ground was covered with like the gravel landscaping rocks, and then I also had a huge creeping bellflower issue in my back that I'm trying to remediate, but I wanted to have a planting bed that could kind of, I didn't have to dig into, and that I could kind of prevent some of that bellflower. So some of the steps that you want to take if you're doing a no-till garden bed. So first, if it is a grass area, I would definitely mow any grass or weeds using the lowest setting. You could also use a weed whacker. I wouldn't necessarily recommend pulling weeds, just because that kind of just spurs more weed growth. And then cover the entire area with overlapping pieces of brown corrugated cardboard. You really do want to make sure, sometimes with the flaps of the cardboard, or if there's handholds, you want to make sure that you've got all of those open spaces covered to really prevent the majority of weeds from coming through. And then adding alternating layers of nitrogen and carbon with about 2 inches thick of each layer. So for the larger garden beds that have more layers, it's recommended that you wet the layers lightly with a hose or with some sort of irrigation. I don't know that I did that in the raised garden bed, but if you are putting a lot of material in there, it kind of helps get that process of decomposition started. And then if you're going to plant into it, you're going to want to definitely add a layer of, the compost and then garden soil or potting soil on top of there, because you're not going to really want to be able to plant directly into those different layers of organic material. And so if you're not familiar, nitrogen materials are going to be things like compost, well-rotted manure, and grass clippings, kind of considered the green in a compost. And then the carbon layer could be dry leaves, it could be sawdust, it could be wood chips, although I don't recommend incorporating wood chips into the soil. That would probably be just a layer on top, if anything, but probably not even in a vegetable garden. And then I use more of a simplified layer of just the cardboard and some arborist, like wood chips or mulch, for different trees, shrubs, and transplants, maybe like native plants is where I've used it a lot. And so here are just a couple pictures to show an example. On the left, I ended up planting that area with native plants. So to do that, I laid down the cardboard. I put a fairly thick layer of the wood chip mulch on the top, and then I did let that sit for quite a while. I don't remember exactly how long. It's probably best if you can let it sit for, a couple months, but for sure at least like a couple weeks to kind of help that cardboard start to break down. And then for transplanting, I just kind of scoot the wood chips aside, punch a hole into the cardboard, and then plant whatever plant that you want to put in there, and then just kind of cover it back up again, but not putting too much mulch around the stems of the plants. And then this picture on the right is another example of where I have little cherry trees planted. So here I think I actually put the trees in, or the shrubs in first, and then layered the cardboard around the trees, and then added the mulch layer. So it kind of depends on what you're planting. Trees and shrubs I would plant first and then put the cardboard around them. Transplants like native plants, often I will do that first. And then plant into them, because it's a little bit harder once you have all of your little baby plants in the ground to get all of that mulch distributed around them. So here's another picture of using the cardboard and mulch for different trees and shrubs. This is at our food forest demonstration garden at McCrory, and this is an apple tree. with our companion plants around it. And prior to planting these smaller companion plants, we actually put down the layer of cardboard and mulch. It wasn't very long. I think it was only maybe a couple weeks, but we were still able to get through that cardboard layer pretty well, and then scooch up the mulch around the base of the plants. So for this, it's fairly similar. You just want to mow any grass or weeds, plant your trees or shrubs, as I mentioned prior to putting down that cardboard, and then place the cardboard and wood chips around the trees. And, you know, potentially, if you've got the time, let the cardboard decompose a while before planting additional plants. Here's another example of cardboard in a fairly deep layer of wood chips at our Brookings Community Food Forest, where we have a few different apple trees planted, some shrubs, some rhubarb. You can't really see the shrubs and the rhubarb yet because this was just right after we planted it. But we were lucky to have the city of Brookings has wood chips available to the public. You can go get them at our city like forestry building. Sometimes, I think, depending on how busy they are, they might drop them off at your home location if you give them a call. I've had that done in the past, but this is an example of a fairly deep layer of wood chips over top of the cardboard that we put down around these trees. So back to the concern with cardboard, there were some studies recently. A study in poultry science last year, I think, is what kind of caused most of the concern. And then a popular garden blog, Garden Professors, kind of reinforced the concern about different types of chemical contamination that could be present in cardboard, primarily PFAS, but there could be other sorts of adhesives. But really, looking into it a little bit further, kind of did some digging, if you will, and really most of our cardboard shipping boxes and corrugated cardboard, all of those companies say that they do not use any chemicals such as, I don't know what type of chemicals other than the PFAS in their glues or in their inks. Usually they're vegetable-based inks and usually vegetable-based glues as well. And really the place where PFAS is more of a concern is in this study. They actually used this recycled cardboard material that was shredded up for chicken litter. And so this study really wasn't even looking at the levels of PFAS that might be present in cardboard in a garden setting. It was used in a poultry litter situation. And I'll show another little bit of information about that in the next slide. And then the Garden Professor blog and the corresponding paper there, it was more concerned with reduced air exchange in soil that was covered with cardboard. But looking into that paper a little bit more, I actually didn't see much of a significant difference between like the control and the cardboard. It was really primarily the plastic mulch that had a larger reduction in air exchange. And if anybody has used cardboard in the garden, I think in that setting, it often breaks down much more quickly than in the lab setting or in the greenhouse setting, which is what that paper was referring to. So it's important to not take results out of context. You know, thinking about what kind of chemicals might be in recycled cardboard used in chicken litter is completely different than using brown corrugated cardboard in a small layer in your garden. And so this is a lot of numbers here on this table, but the thing that I wanted to point out, like I just said, is the poultry science study didn't claim to demonstrate PFAS in shipping boxes like we would typically use in a sheet mulching situation, because they actually had all types of shredded cardboard included. And then they also compared the cardboard used to the wood chips on a weight-to-weight basis, which in a garden setting, you're only using a very thin layer of cardboard, not like, you know, like the 12 inches of wood chips that you would potentially use that is recommended by the Garden Professors. So if you really use that much cardboard and compared it on a weight-to-weight basis, yeah, the cardboard does show more PFAS, but in our garden settings, we would never be using that much cardboard because you'd have to like stack cardboard up for inches and you'd never be able to dig through it. And then in that case, it probably would hinder like gas diffusion and oxygen in the soil. So anyway, there's also a lot of great research from both scientific publications and extension publications that demonstrate that cardboard has been used effectively in different garden and farm situations. I know this is a lot of papers, but I just wanted to give you the effect of that there is a lot out there showing that cardboard is used with beneficial results. So there are some things to consider when using cardboard. Make sure that you use the corrugated brown cardboard with minimal to no colored print. Most of the inks on like your Amazon or your Chewy boxes are vegetable inks, but just to be on the safe side, try to have minimal ink and remove any tape. Obviously, remove staples. I know some of the larger boxes that are thicker, I really like to use them because they kind of suppress the weeds a lot longer, but sometimes they have staples, which you definitely don't want to be having in your garden. So if you're using cardboard with the full like sheet mulching technique, it requires a lot of organic material, and that usually it's recommended to wait 6 to 12 months before planting into those in a more like a vegetable garden setting. Another thing to keep in mind is if fewer layers of cardboard are used, weeds can still become an issue. I know I have a picture coming up of my unfortunate space where I said I have creeping bellflower in my yard, and it's really actually kind of likes cardboard, it seems, and it's finding it a good growing medium. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Another thing to keep in mind is, in general, just don't mulch up onto tree trunks or directly around the plant stems. That can definitely cause some problems. And as with most things, not everything that you read about or hear about is appropriate for all soil conditions, especially if you've got a damp spot in your yard, if it's saturated or poorly draining, or deeper clay soils. That can create some anaerobic conditions unless you're really careful about layering and only thinking that you're going to be planting on top of that. So building up that organic material on the top. And so here's my sad picture of the cardboard and the wood chips that I didn't put in a deep enough layer where I have a happy like little colony of creeping bellflower. So that's just something to keep in mind. But overall, I recommend using cardboard. I think it's a great way to use up otherwise, just materials that would either be going to the recycling or wherever. And so the more that we can kind of use those resources that we have on hand, the better. And especially when it's been found to be primarily beneficial to most soils and most conditions. So as I mentioned, it can help to build soil. If you're, continually layering on top, it can really help to reduce weeding and conserve water. It can help with the water holding capacity on organic matter, reducing waste, and increases earthworm and mycorrhizal fungi and soil life in your soil. So cardboard is great. You can use that. And the interesting thing is you make sure a little way to test it is if you put a drop of olive oil on the cardboard and it just speeds up and sits there, that's an indication that you have potentially PFAS or other of those chemicals in your cardboard. Whereas if it kind of diffuses and soaks in, that's a good indication that it does not. And frankly, we have a lot more PFAS in our food takeout containers that we're probably exposed to than any cardboard that we're putting down into the garden from corrugated cardboard boxes. So if you're concerned about PFAS, be more concerned about takeout boxes and food containers and pizza boxes and all of that, because that's where it's used even more. So if you're interested in the studies that I was talking about, to look and do a little bit more digging, here they are, and I can also send those out to people if they're interested. My contact info, if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer. And that's it.
So we do have a couple questions, Robin. One is, what should you do with the cardboard after the season is done? This is in reference to the thick appliance cardboard boxes, which are very
Just
thick.
leave it. Yeah, I don't pull that cardboard back up again.
Okay.
Yeah, I just keep it on the ground. I put the wood chips on the top of it. Or, if you're doing the full, set of layers, it will degrade, even the thicker stuff. And I mean, you want it to degrade over time, but you also do want it to suppress weeds in the short term. So yeah, I don't pick it up.
Okay. And then can you use shredded paper?
I think so, as long as you're careful about, inks and things like that. A lot of our white copy paper has been bleached, and that could potentially have, more chemicals in it. So maybe not the copy paper, but like newspaper that's printed with the soy or vegetable-based
Mhm.
inks, because actually laying down a layer of newspaper is sometimes recommended instead of cardboard, or you could do it in addition to cardboard. And then just
Yeah.
today at the field day that I was at, where they were talking about mulching and no-till, Shane from the NRCS was talking about how he's been using paper mulch that comes on a roll, and that's actually done a pretty good job
Hmm.
of suppressing weeds in his garden. So, that's a purchase product versus like using cardboard that would otherwise, go to waste, or that you can kind of scavenge in the cardboard only bins, which
Yeah.
is what I've done before in the alley behind businesses where it says cardboard only, and I'm like, ooh. And I know Chris Golday had said that he does the same from the Soil Health Coalition. So, it takes a little bit of work to peel all of that plastic off and stuff, but it's a free resource. So,
Yeah, and I will say I have noticed that some companies, as they're shipping boxes, they've been moving to like a paper-based tape.
Mhm.
So for those kinds of things, like would you still remove like if it's a craft paper tape, or like could you maybe just leave those on?
You could probably leave them on. I've noticed with the Amazon boxes, sometimes they'll have the paper tape, but then it has all of those strings in it, which I
Mm,
think are kind of plastic. It's almost impossible to get all of those off.
yeah,
So I kind of just do the best that I can.
yeah, yeah. The yeah, the tape would not be good. We don't want to add the microplastics in addition to PFAS.
Definitely not.
Well, very good. Oh, let's see. We've got one more question that popped in. Oh yeah, and good tip, grocery stores and food pantries often have boxes available for recycling. Yeah, and
Mhm.
I would say too, the same places that you hit up for like the free moving boxes, liquor stores as well usually have some good boxes, although sometimes they might be kind of like shiny on the outside. I think you're gonna want something that's like, you know,
Yeah,
just
anything
cardboard.
that's shiny or kind of waxy, you want to steer clear of that. And sometimes some of those like grocery store boxes, they have a lot of ink on them, and then they also have a lot of openings, like they have the handles
Mm.
and stuff.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to give the weeds any more places. And yeah, we'll have to do like either an off-season discussion or something about creeping bellflower because I did not know what that was before this summer, and now I'm just seeing it's gone viral as far as like weeds to watch out for. Creeping bellflower has absolutely gone viral.
yeah, that's what it does. It goes viral everywhere. In fact, my entire yard is basically all creeping bellflower, except where I painstakingly dug it up and tried to extract as many roots as possible and then sheet mulched over the top. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
all right.
Well, cool. All right. Well, folks, if you've got additional questions, throw those in the chat. I am going to share my screen here real quick and talk about some cool bugs, as I always do. The first up is a picture of a steel blue cricket hunter actually with a cricket. So some of you might remember that I've shown off this wasp before. It's one of my favorites. Has a very similar life cycle to the cicada killer, only it goes after crickets and other sort of more ground-dwelling insects. And this picture came to me from another SDSU Extension employee, Matt Nippling, sent it to me after last week's garden hour. So I was very excited to see this, but they're super cool wasps. They hang out close to the ground and they really do not care about people at all, but they will help if you've got, an annoying cricket in your garage that won't shut up. And I did want to touch on the goldenrod soldier beetle, as I've been seeing a lot of these out in the field. I was out near Huron on Friday. We were just like driving through clouds of them as we were touring the Magatahopi Wilderness, wildlife production area. And you can see it is a yellowish beetle. They like to hang out on goldenrod and other asters, but they'll really go to almost any flowering plant. And they do occur in large numbers to the point that I think some people think that because there are so many of them in one spot, they must be a pest, but they're not. We do consider them to be minor pollinators because they are moving from flower to flower and they do end up taking some pollen with them. But 'tis the season for the goldenrod soldier beetle. Don't be alarmed. They're harmless to people. Kind of beneficial out there in the ecosystem, and they're just doing their thing. I know when I was at McCrory a couple weeks ago, I saw a bunch there as well. So this is definitely the time of year where they start to peak. And while I was out in the field at Magatahopi, I did see more aphids. I was very excited. We were looking at a lot of the milkweed that was out there. We did find a monarch egg on one of them, saw lots of monarchs flying around, but I was rewarded by finally finding a colony of Aphis nerrii, the oleander aphid, which specializes in milkweed. And you can see it has that nice bright yellow color, which is sort of, a lot of the things that feed on milkweed have bright colors to tell predators and other things that they don't taste good. So I was just very excited. I really enjoy aphids. We're getting towards the time of year where people start seeing like more and more spiders. I'm in the camp that spiders are friends, especially if they're outside. Just let them chill, hang out. This very cute jumping spider was on a weed in my yard. I think like a milk thistle or something that I need to pull out before it completely goes to seed, per Greg's advice from last week. But yeah, we'll start to see kind of more spiders. I usually start getting more questions about spiders in September, especially when things like wolf spiders start to wander indoors. But yeah, just put the spiders back outside. That's where they want to be. They are friends, not foes. This one you can kind of see actually has a smaller insect in its jaws. So they're out there being generalist predators, helping us out with a little bit of pest control. And honestly, jumping spiders are adorable. And then I did want to show off katydids because I had a couple questions this week. I got a really nice picture of an adult katydid, and the person was like, I am trying to figure out what this is. It kind of looks like a grasshopper, but it's not quite right. And I was like, you know what? You're super close. They are in the same order as the grasshoppers. So they are hanging out in Orthoptera with our grasshoppers and our crickets. But the katydids are also super well camouflaged. So I've got an adult katydid here on the left. And then I have a nymph on the right, both from Magatohope, possibly the same species, just because they were sort of in proximity, and looked a bit similar, but hard to tell until they get their full-size wings. But katydids are very similar to grasshoppers. They've got the, jumping hind legs. They are kind of leggier than grasshoppers. Their legs are longer and more slender, sort of compared to their body. And they also have really long antennae. They do tend to camouflage very well, as you can see in these pictures if you still haven't found the insects in them. But they are usually like the same kind of green as the leaves around them. The adults and the nymph here, you can both see they sort of have this like striping on their back that almost mimics a blade of grass. So great at hiding out. They are herbivores, but they never really like occur in large enough numbers that we consider them to really be a pest. I sometimes notice some like random damage on a couple of my ornamental annuals, and I'm like, there's probably a katydid in here chewing on some things, but nothing that I, even worry about trying to control at all. But yeah, katydids are out there. They're pretty cool looking. So if you see something that you're like, why does this leaf have really long antenna? Might be a katydid. And then just a reminder of some of our upcoming events. I know there will be a smattering of us at the Horticulture building at the State Fair, giving talks at certain points during the fair. And then also the Master Gardeners will have a booth in the Horticulture building. So you can stop by, say hey to them, grab some resources, ask them some questions. And then I'll be closing out the season with Insect Fest at McCrory Gardens on September 6th. So we'll be back here next week and then one more week for regular season garden hour. And then we will be doing an off-season garden hour. So we'll have more details on that probably by the time we get to the end of August. And it looks like, let's see, if my screen wasn't showing up, we'll maybe fix that in post for the recording. Oh, and let's see, somebody has a local business that lets them get their boxes from the treadmills and the stationary bikes. Man, that is a find. So if you've got yeah, maybe your like local like bike shop or like sports store, make some friends with your local business owners who you think might be getting some large shipments of cardboard. Or in my case, I went to IKEA quite a few months ago and I have some IKEA boxes that I could definitely break down. But yeah, it doesn't look like we have any other questions that have come in. But yeah, just a reminder in the chat, we've got some links to our contact information as well as the recordings on YouTube, which all have a summary underneath of them and timestamps so you can jump to whichever segment you want. But yeah, it was great hearing from everybody tonight. And I keep like watching the echinacea in my front yard and being like, don't get Aster yellows. Now that everybody is talking, much like creeping bellflower, which I definitely have, I'm like, we'll deal with you later. Peer, I feel like is a little bit more of a harsher environment for some of these more invasive weeds because we don't have as much moisture as you guys do on the eastern side of the state. And I'm pretty sure I have a patch of creeping bellflower in my lawn, but when you keep it mowed down, it's actually a really nice ground cover, which is annoying because
Say that.
like I know, yeah, I'm like other people hate it, but I'm like, you're not kosher.
Yeah. I know, usually for things like that, I don't mind the biodiversity of the yard, like even like the Swedish ivy and things like that.
Yeah.
But the creeping bellflower, no, I'm done with that. You gotta nip it in the bud because it will spread out those underground roots, and it has this giant deep taproot that if you don't dig 6 to 12 inches down and get that out, and then try to get down all the little rootlets, it will just come back. So the good thing about a creeping bellflower, maybe the only good thing, is that taproot is edible like a carrot. So
Oh,
if times get
interesting.
tough and you have a lot of bellflower in your yard, than me, like me, I was like, well, I know where I can find some extra food, I guess.
That is interesting. Yeah, the patch that's in the lawn is very like it only likes this one area that is a little bit more shaded. Once it gets to like the full sun, it's not having that. So it is kind of like being naturally bounded by the fact that I don't water my yard.
Okay,
So
well, that's good because if it gets out of hand, it's all over.
I was gonna say, yeah, I don't know. I can't keep mint alive in the ground. So I'm I'm gardening on a different level out here.
Yeah.
Some real like my cup plant is maybe 4.5 feet tall and it flowered. Like it's having a rough year. So whereas, when you get farther east, it can get, I mean, my parents' place in Pennsylvania, that thing would be 8 feet tall. So they're like, oh no, we're having a
No,
drought.
it's really wet. I noticed just driving to Frankfurt today. It's just there's just standing water everywhere over here. So
Yeah, it was really interesting going to Magatahopi. So for folks who don't know, that is to the west of Huron just a little bit. And anyone can go hang out, look at the kiosks, whatever, but it's usually a wetland. And since we didn't have any snow last winter, there was no snow melt to fill up the wetland. And so all of the areas that had water last year now have a native plant in them that only shows up when wetlands dry out. I think it was red goosefoot.
really,
Yeah, super cool. Like just really neat. Like just all filled up with this red goose foot, which serves a purpose of like it effectively chokes out, a lot of invaders that might take over, that area. And so fingers crossed that, we get some moisture and they can be wetlands again. But yeah, our Fish and Wildlife Service guide said that it had been 15 years since those wetlands had been dry. So those
wow.
red goosefoot seeds had been hanging out in the wetland for 15 years.
Well, that's interesting because Huron isn't that much further west
Yeah.
than like Frankfurt because I actually drove through Huron on my way home. So yeah, it's not too big of a like geographical distance, but I guess the actual weather is different, quite a
Well,
bit
and
different.
also for the recharging of the wetland needing that winter, like the winter snowmelt moisture, which like we can have, possibly all the rain we want, but it's not going to sort of
Right.
recharge the groundwater as
Yeah.
much. So yeah, it was just really interesting the massive difference that like winter precipitation versus, the thunderstorms that we're getting in the summer. But yeah, it was just super cool, and we saw some cool birds and a lot of cool bugs. So highly recommend going and tromping around there. Apparently it gets some heavy use during hunting season, so maybe once it's pheasant season, don't go out there. But very cool. And I can definitely, plug the volunteer naturalist some other time if you run into me. I'll tell you about it. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Cody, any final thoughts for folks before we head out?
There is something I did want to mention. We are working on an article for Aster Yellows, so a lot of the questions people were having, we're hopefully going to try to answer those in that. So keep an eye for that when that shows up. That should be in a few weeks. Other than that, I don't know. I'm excited to be here. This is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and for those articles, if you're not already subscribed to the Garden and Yard newsletter, definitely subscribe. We send an issue out every other week and then less frequently during the off season, but it's a great way to get sort of all of our latest, greatest hits delivered to your inbox, as well as some reruns from previous years of topics that are still timely. So we'll be looking for that. And if anyone has some funky pictures of Aster yellows, send them to Cody so that he can use them. And Robin, any final thoughts for this evening? Any new places you're going to go dumpster dive for cardboard?
Probably not in the near future, although we will be expanding the food forest here this fall once we get the fence up. So I'll be excited to share more about that as that project kind of develops.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to those updates, and we will see everybody here next week for another edition of Garden Hour. Until then, happy gardening.
Thanks.